Hello, everyone. This is Lisa Patterson with Daniel Ravenel, Sotheby's International Realty in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. And I'm just waiting to start a meeting with Jennifer Flanagin, and she'll be here shortly. And we're going to go over some great information about why buyers and sellers need representation. So we'll wait on Jennifer. She's joining now. Hey, Jennifer.
How are you?
I'm good. How's it going?
Good, going well, hanging in there. I'm excited to do this. Happy to see your
Yeah.
pretty face.
Thanks. It was good to see you. Being in quarantine is so everybody's learning how to do business a new and different way. So
Exactly.
I just let everyone know you were joining. This is Jennifer Flanagin. She's with Case Law here in Charleston, and Jennifer's actually from Charleston. She's a real estate attorney here in town. I think Jennifer's the best in town. When you deal with Jennifer, you get to talk directly to her. There's not an assistant involved that you're talking to. She actually gives out her cell phone number. It's just unbelievable and full of information. So we are going to talk a little bit today about why buyers and sellers need representation when they're doing a real estate transaction. And one of the biggest things I hear, Jennifer, is I have people when I have a listing, they'll call and they'll tell me, I'm just going to call the listing agents and deal with them because I think, they think, and they've told me that they will get a better deal if they deal right with the listing agent. And I explained to them that's not the case, but from a legal standpoint, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Lisa, you and I have spoken about that before, and I was just shocked to hear that buyers actually think that. And the first thing that all of the buyers who are listening to this need to realize and understand is that buyers don't pay the commission in South Carolina. In South Carolina, the seller pays the commission. So a buyer is getting an agent's services for free. And so they're not paying for it. The listing agent, the seller pays for the commission for the listing agent and the buyer's agent, and the buyer just gets to have a great agent represent them. The second thing that I think buyers need to understand is really the timeline of the process. And before the property even goes on the market, the seller has met with an agent, the listing agent, and they have sat down and entered into a written agreement that outlines the terms of the agent's representation of the seller. And this includes commission amount, and it also includes the sales price. And so this has already been contemplated between the agent and the seller before the house is even on the market for a buyer to look at. So by the time the buyer comes around and wants to put an offer for this, the written agreement is already in place. And so the amount of commission and the sales price is already negotiated. And so the buyer stepping in and trying to negotiate a lower sales price from the seller or the listing agent typically is really not going to happen, because that's already taken place. That's already been decided upon between the seller and their agent. And so, two big things. Number one, the buyer gets their agent for free. And number two, the sales price is already agreed upon. And so calling the listing agent is not going to help the buyer in any way. And the third point about that is, if they do contact the listing agent, the buyer needs to realize the listing agent does not represent them. And the agent, the agent client relationship is governed by agency law. And in South Carolina, agency law provides a lot of responsibilities for the agent, a lot of obligations they have for their client, but it also provides a lot of limitations that the agent has for those who are not their client. And in a scenario where the agent represents the seller and the buyer reaches out to the agent, that agent does not represent the buyer, and they are limited with what information they can provide, with what services they can provide. Really, truly, they can provide basic administrative services. They can, copies, emails for initials and signing, but they can't provide any actual substantive advice to the buyer. And so not only will, they not have somebody representing them, but they're not going to have, and the listing agent is not going to provide them with any information. And the listing agent is going to represent their client, who is the seller. And the seller's interests are oftentimes completely adverse to the buyer's interests. And so that's something that the buyer needs to understand, is that the listing agent is not going to represent them.
Exactly. I work with buyers and sellers. And I have in the past represented both. As you know, it does work sometime, but I do not like to do it. Because we are bound by law to represent that seller. And we're very limited, as you said, what we can do for the buyer. We literally, we can't advise them in any way, shape, or form. Me living downtown, I know a lot about a lot of the properties downtown, even before they go on the market, even if I'm not representing that property in any way, shape, or form. So, it's hard not to be able to disclose information to a buyer. And it makes it very difficult. And it's just not a good deal for the buyer at all. They find themselves in a situation and can get them in a situation that can be bad for them. I've
That's
seen it
right.
happen before.
That's right. And you mentioned dual agency, which can happen and can be successful, but more times than not, you and I both have probably seen instances where it's a big problem, because when you're a buyer, you need someone representing your interests, which are different than the seller's interests. And when you only have one agent um, for both parties, it's really almost impossible for that agent to effectively represent either party, truthfully, from a legal perspective, because they are so limited with the information they can provide. That's not going to be um, cause a problem for the client they're representing, that their hands are tied. And so, most of the time I see that when you have a dual agent, and again, except for maybe some limited circumstances where the parties, maybe they know each other, or maybe they've already entered into some separate agreement, but most of the time when you have a dual agent, neither party is being represented fully, in my opinion,
Exactly.
as if their own agent.
I know we are going to talk about this, and we're going to start a series of different things, and we're going to talk about the contracts and different things. But a perfect example that what happens sometime when a buyer doesn't have representation is due diligence versus repair. That's a big one, and that can mean a lot. I know when I'm representing a buyer, I wear one hat, and when I'm representing the seller, another. Um, and that is a big thing that comes down to that in representation.
It does, and you're right, Lisa. That is a great example, and we'll talk more about that. But and this goes to the agent, to your agent. I mean, there are many agents don't understand the difference between due diligence and repair addendum, and so fortunately, Lisa is one of those agents who does understand the difference, and really is very knowledgeable about the contract. And so just keep that in mind when using an agent, because there are a lot of agents who don't understand it, and if the agent doesn't understand it, you can guarantee the parties don't understand it. And so you're exactly right that the repair addendum, and again, we'll go more into this, but the repair addendum is really written kind of favorable for the seller, and the due diligence is written favorably for the buyer. And so if you're a listing agent and your client is the seller, more times than not, you're going to push the repair addendum for your client, because that is almost always in the best interest of the seller. Um, Conversely, if you're a buyer's agent and you are representing the buyer, you will represent your client, and more often than not, you will push for the due diligence addendum, because that's in the best interest of your buyer. But if you're the listing agent and you're not, and the buyer is unrepresented, well, I mean, you go ahead and tell them to do the repair addendum, because you're representing your client. You're doing exactly what you should be doing as a listing agent, and the buyer, too bad for the buyer who didn't get an agent and doesn't understand the ramifications of certain choices that are proposed by the listing agent. And there's a lot of that in the contract. I mean, it's like you said. I mean, when you're a buyer's agent, you wear the buyer's agent hat, and you have to write the contract and read the contract as representing the buyer. Seller credit. You want to ask the seller for a credit. You want to ask the seller for a home warranty. Just different requirements like that. And a seller's agent, you're wearing a completely different hat, and so you'll have a different idea as far as what you're going to write in the contract, and how you're going to approach the offer. And so it's two completely separate things. And for the buyer, I really do think that you need your own representation. Many buyers come from out of town, as you see all the time, Lisa. Their states have different contracts, different rules. Our contract is different, and I think that it's important to have someone, an expert like Lisa, who really truly has been doing this for decades. She started when she was one, and she really knows what she's doing, and you need an agent like that to represent your interests. And not only does Lisa know the contract, she also knows Charleston, which I think is also separately important, especially for people coming from out of town, but even people who live locally. I mean, she knows about certain historical features to homes, and the requirements that go along with that, and the Architectural Review Board, what they're going to look for, and Historic Charleston Foundation. And she works with all of these entities. And she really is knowledgeable about what you're looking at in Charleston. Flooding, it's a huge thing. And she knows, who floods, who doesn't, and all of that. And so I would really strongly urge you not only to get an agent, but to get a good agent.
Yeah,
And
and a lot of people, as you said, they come from out of town, different states, different things, and they don't understand that buyer's agency agreement that we ask them to sign. And one of the things, they're afraid of signing it. They're afraid they're going to get stuck. One of the things that I do a lot is tell them, you don't have to sign it for a long period of time. We can just sign it for today. And
that's
then,
exactly right.
it's not always a good fit personality wise, maybe they don't like something how I do things, or I may find they're just not a good fit for me either. But at least have that representation, because when they're out looking at properties, if they are not under a buyer's agency agreement and they start asking questions about, what should I offer for this? What do you know about this? Do you know anything about the flooding? I'm bound. I cannot tell them anything unless they're under buyer's agency.
That's exactly right. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's a really important point that I wish more agents would impress upon their clients. Um, and if anyone ever has any question, and Lisa, this is for you to pass along to your clients as well. If anybody ever has any questions about that document, because it is really a legal type document, have them call me, because really, I mean, legally, in my opinion, you shouldn't even be opening the door to show a house without having that signed with a
Exactly.
buyer, because it protects you, it protects them, it gives you certain responsibilities now for them, it allows you to divulge information and advise in certain ways that you couldn't without it, and you really need it before you even open the door to a home. And so if anybody ever has any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to review it with you. It is a very important document. It establishes that agency relationship. And like Lisa said, you don't have to establish that. There's a time limit in the document. You don't have to establish that agency relationship forever, for even a month. I mean, you could do a day, you could do a week, just during the showings. But you do need to have that in place. We want to see it as lawyers. I know brokers want to see it for the file, because again, it provides protections for you as the buyer, and also for the realtor. So that is very important.
Yeah, that is important. And a lot of people just don't understand it and think they're getting themselves into something, and that they don't, I've actually had people say, well, I don't need to sign this because I don't need representation. Um, and we just discussed that.
Right. You do.
They
You do
definitely,
need representation.
exactly. Um, is there anything else that you think is in the contract that they need to know about?
Um, I mean, I think we'll have future calls, I think, where it would be good to go over, specifics in the contract. I mean, I just think it's good right now for buyers to understand that there are terms in the contract that really do require your agent to negotiate with the listing agent, with the other side. And some people may say, oh, it's an attorney state, I'll just get an attorney. Well, attorneys don't do that in South Carolina. Some other states, they do negotiate the contract. I think New York is one of them.
Exactly.
South Carolina, we really don't get involved until the contract is ratified. And if we are going to get involved, it's going to be at an hourly rate, and that bill is going to creep up quickly, and the buyer will be responsible for that bill. That will be a cost to them, versus if they just got an agent, the seller pays that full commission. And so, that whole period of inspecting the home, and the walkthroughs, and the writing the terms, and negotiating credits, and home warranties, and the sales price, and getting the appraisal back, negotiating the sales price after the appraisal. I mean, all of that is done by the agent. The buyer's agent has a huge mountain of responsibilities that they do for their clients, and that's why they have to love it. Which, like Lisa, who really truly does love it, and loves working for buyers and sellers out there. She loves working for her clients, and she loves getting them, the result that they want. But it's a lot of responsibility that the agent does, truly. And we as the attorneys don't get involved until that contract is ratified. And then even afterwards, the inspections and the termite and the, repair, negotiations and any credits and final walkthroughs and all of that is still done by the agent. I mean, the agent's job doesn't stop.
Yeah,
um,
a lot of people don't realize, they're excited, we're looking at property, and then they put something under contract, and they do not realize that's really when all the hard work begins right there, because
yeah,
that's really just the beginning of everything that has to go. And a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that our buyers and sellers never know about, because we're duking it out with the other agent, trying to make everything work to get that buyer and seller to the terms where that house can close.
that's right. And I think that's a really good point, that the agents oftentimes work behind the scenes and the buyers and sellers really don't know. And truly, as a buyer or a seller, that's the last thing you want to deal with, right? You're selling, you're trying to move, you're trying to pack up, you're getting a new job, or you're trying to figure out, where you're going. And as a buyer, you're excited, you're moving from somewhere else, you're trying to pack up and, get the movers and all that. I mean, the last thing you want to do is, battle with the other side. That's what your agent's for. Your agent does that for you. It's really truly a great service because they take care of all of that, which is a giant headache. And it's the last thing you want to do. And you have plenty of other stuff to worry about, especially as a buyer if you're getting a loan, because then you're dealing with your lender, daily, likely, because they want just about everything to approve you for your loan. And they so this, you don't really want to worry about having to negotiate throughout every little nuance after you ratify the contract. And that's your agent's job, which is great. And the only other thing I would say, as far as mentioning getting a loan, early stages, buyers, talk to your lender, get your pre-approval information out, know what you're looking for. If you have questions about lenders and want new referrals, talk to Lisa or I. We have lots of referrals here that we can send your way. And we've talked about this. Lisa and I have talked about this before, and I can speak personally on this. For lenders, insurance, we really believe that, and we really see it, that local is not only more efficient and faster, it's also a lot of times cheaper.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I find that a lot. Buyers will say, well, I'll just use my person that I use in New York or New Jersey or wherever it may be. And it doesn't go well for them. We've been at the last minute, we're having to jump through hoops to find another insurance person, sometimes even another lender, because they just don't understand all the nuances that we have here in Charleston with flooding and elevations and historic properties and things of that nature. So it can be a nightmare if you don't use local.
yeah. And we're happy to provide, any buyers with several different referrals, and call and get quotes, and they all do a good job. Yeah, that's what I would suggest. And anything else you want to add, Lisa?
I can't think of anything. I appreciate your time. Jennifer and I will do some more of these. So if you have certain things that you want to know about, just shoot me an email and we'll get on that topic and get them out to you. So see you soon.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa.